Okay, good morning, everybody. Jeremy Jacobs here on Laurel Leaf. In fact, our first Laurel Leaf Facebook Live. I'm Jeremy Jacobs, Sales Rainmaker, and I've been involved now, I think, with Laurel's group for about, must be 2 or 3 years now. I can't remember exactly, but she certainly does an awful lot of good work, some great events, some great speakers at her live events, good networking, and amazingly, she's got over like 11,000 people in her group, and there's a huge eclectic mix of people that come to the group. And what I like about it when I do go along, which isn't as often as I should, maybe, there's always about 35 or 40 people. So there's lots of energy, lots of buzz in our networking groups, and you get to meet all sorts of interesting people, from lawyers to bankers to gardeners to flower people to events people. And I think really we've all got one thing in common. We're all looking to find new business. We're all looking to earn more money. And yet the one word I never particularly hear being bandied around any sort of networking group, and that is this word called sales. Whether we like it or not, we are all sales people. And whatever we do, whether we're a massage therapist or a banker or a lawyer, we are selling our professional services and or products. So, and yet people want to sort of shy away from selling, and really, you ought not to be really. It is not a job, selling. It's actually a profession, and yet people tend to sort of hide behind their how can I put it, their fear of sales, or it was seen years ago as rough trade, wasn't it? But really nowadays, nothing really happens without anybody selling something. So you really have to be on your game, on your mettle, and really find out what it is where you are. I've got 20 sales insights today. We'll try and rush through them. I appreciate there's going to be tons of questions coming through. I've already got 1 or 2 on Twitter already. But essentially, before I even start about selling, is this, what is it really you want to achieve, whether you're working for a company or whether you're working off your own bat? What is it you want to achieve financially? Do you want to grow the business, or are you doing something which is, how can I put it? You're doing it as a hobby or as a part-time, but whatever you want to do, you've got to have some sort of objective. And I think before you even start, is give yourself this question, write it down if you like, and that is, what is your why? We've heard this before, haven't we? It's just the famous Simon Sinek quote. What is your why? What are you doing? What drives you to get up each morning? What drives you to go along to one of Laurel's fantastic events? What is it you want to do with your life? That's the first thing, but that is really mindset. That would take 2 or 3 Facebook Lives to sort of go over. But let's look at things a bit more practical terms. You first of all got to have an objective for your business. You secondly got to have some sort of strategy for your business. And then there are a series of tactics. Now, tactics can be cold calling, it could be networking, local advertising. Find out what is best for you. But the first thing you have to do is get this objective. What I want to be in 3 years' time or 5 years' time. And start thinking how you would also make decisions in 3 and 5 years' time. Then you have a strategy. Sit down and take some time to think about it. And strategy really is all about what is it you want? How are you going to get your success through your business? In my particular case, it's through one-to-one coaching, seminars, workshops, and public speaking, and some video too. But video can also be a tactic, as is in this Facebook Live. So there's a whole melange of things you can sort of think of to get your business. In fact, we have our first question coming in, and someone has already said, Jeremy, how relevant is cold calling in 2017, given that we have networking and online? Well, I would say that to Toby in East Anglia, I would say, Toby, that cold calling is very relevant. But like any other sort of sales activity, it has to be done professionally, has to be planned, and you've got to say the right things to the person at the other end of the telephone. But just because it's something that people did in the 1960s and 1970s successfully, it does still work. And although it's much harder to get through to people, you still can get great results from cold calling. A little bit more about that right back to the end of this Facebook Live. But really, my first question to you as an audience is, how many of you have heard of this company here? I don't know if you can see that. There you go. They're called Atlassian. Atlassian are an Australian software company. They compete with the likes of Microsoft and Salesforce.com. They, in 2015, turned over something like 320 million US dollars. But the strange thing is that their cost of sale was less than half of their competitors. Now, why do you suppose that is? Well, I'll tell you straight away. It's because they run their business without salespeople, which is a bit of a frightening prospect. I'll repeat that because it's quite scary. Without salespeople. They don't have salespeople on a commission structure or salaried. And as a result, their cost of sale was considerably less. The point I'm making is, because of artificial intelligence, the internet, and automation, there'll be fewer and fewer ordinary sales jobs, whether that's sort of business to consumer or business to business. And that basically means that as sales professionals, you really have to be very professional in the way you go about your business. You have to understand what makes customers tick, and that really is the thread that goes through my sort of Facebook Live this morning. It is understanding your customer, how their brains work, how their customers work, how their buying process is. But rest assured that unless you are a professional and unless you're relevant, I think eventually many salespeople, and this includes the sort of the single man accountant or solicitor on the high street, will not be there in 10 or 15 years' time. I mean, why employ people when a robot or artificial intelligence can do the job better? You know, it really is very, very important you become expert at selling, an expert at understanding the processes of selling. Which brings me on to sort of, I think, really 5 tips in one, in addition to the couple of insights already. And that is, people ask me the whole time, Jeremy, what actually is the sales process? Well, I think it's 5 steps, and I think the first 5, or the first one really is ask questions, before you even get to asking questions, gain rapport with your potential prospect. Now, many of us do this naturally at networking meetings. It's not talking to people. It's not talking about your job or your sales or your service. It's about listening and being attentive in your listening to what the other person is saying. Try and find out what makes them tick, what their fears, hopes, and aspirations are for the future. And yet try and find out what is their pain. Why aren't they achieving the objectives? What are the sort of the road humps in the way of them being successful in their job? And then once you sort of ask deep meaningful questions, you'll get some sort of idea of a potential solution. Not immediately, but perhaps after 2 or 3 conversations you can get that. And you can then sort of start to begin making some sort of offer about your services and your products. And then really perhaps you can then qualify that customer. You know, if we can show you a way of overcoming your difficulties, can we proceed with this offer or that offer? Always put in what is known as a trial close when you're asking people. But really the most important thing, and I really can't impress on this hard enough, and that really is to ask questions. I won't go into the intricacies of question techniques. That's something you'll have to find out on one of my networking groups or my workshops. And you can always give me a call and I'm behind over my shoulder to find out more. But question. Anyway, moving on. I'd like you to ask yourselves this question, a bit of a conundrum. How many of you have any idea what this figure of 86 billion stands for? What does it mean? What does it denote? It's not the national debt or how much money I'm going to earn next year. 86 billion. In actual fact, it's the number of neurons in the average human brain. The human brain is an incredibly complex piece of kit. It only accounts for 2% of our body mass, and yet it uses up a huge amount of energy or glucose, or it's actually 25% of what we eat each day. Now, a little tip for you for in sales, I'm sure many of you are, is this. If you've got an important meeting coming up with a client, try and make sure you either have that meeting between 9 o'clock and 11:30 or after lunch, because at 11:30 the glucose feed to the brain becomes less and less. And there is some science behind this. And basically what happens is that when you get to that state, you can't make decisions, you can't think correctly because your body needs some glucose. So a little tip for you, if you're going to have an important meeting, try and get it no later in the morning, about 11 or perhaps 11:15. Otherwise you could be facing a client or a prospective customer who can't function terribly well. As I mentioned before, there are lots of things about the human brain that we have to know. And that's just one little tip. Now, something else again, which you may find interesting, is this. Some of you may have heard of a gentleman called Abraham Wald, W-A-L-D. Abraham Wald was a gentleman in the United States during the war. I'll put his name up for you. Hungary. He was a very brilliant man. He actually was tasked by the United States Air Force to work out why they were getting so many losses of the B-29 bomber, which was being used to bomb Nazi Germany during the daytime when the RAF were bombing at night, German industry, German citizens, so on. Planes would return. Some wouldn't, obviously. They'd either be down the bottom of the North Sea, or they would be in a German or a Dutch field. But many planes came back and they were shot up in certain areas. And what the US Air Force were doing, they were repairing these planes. Let's say, for example, most of the damage was done on the wings. And they repaired them with extra metal plating, but it didn't solve the problem. Losses are still high. Then Wald sort of worked out, well, rather than sort of repair the planes where there was sort of flak damage, he would actually suggest to the US Air Force, look, let's repair these planes in the less obvious areas. And they did this, and with the result that planes, or the losses, were fewer and fewer. And the point I'm making here is that sometimes in sales, as it was with anything else in life, it's asking areas of your customer's business which they either hadn't thought of. The most obvious thing here really is most customers are unaware that if they don't buy something, rather than by saving money by not buying something, they'll be in a better off situation. It's our job as professional salespeople to point out the implications of a non-purchase, or indeed a wrong purchase. And this is the thinking behind Abraham Wald and the B-29. It's slightly counterintuitive to how we think. We can only sort of answer questions really on the information that's given to us, but you've got to try and somehow think outside the circle. Because if you don't, you might miss something. Anyway, the resultant fact is that there were fewer and fewer losses of the B-29s, and you could always argue that Abraham Wald sort of, was part of the story that helped the Allies win the war and defeat Nazi Germany. So it's about being very careful how you think about questions. Think counterintuitively. The other area really we've got to think about in business is that of profit. There are basically only three ways of making a profit of your business, Now, this applies to it applies to all of you. And it doesn't really matter what business you're in, whether you're, as I mentioned before, a massage therapist or a lawyer or a banker. We have to maintain profits. And the only way you can do that, really, there are only three ways of doing that. And that is by the one, selling more of what you offer, reducing prices, selling more, increasing the number of sales you make, or by offering discounts. Now, discounts isn't terribly good because that does obviously, tap in to your actual bottom line. The only real way of selling more or getting more profit is to either sell more or put your prices up. Now, both of those things are very, very blunt. But really, sometimes you've got to look at pricing. And pricing really and discounting is terribly important. There was a survey done some little while ago about some guys who were in the States who were sort of looking at their equivalent of the AIM stock market, and they found that the companies that concentrated on getting their pricing right were the ones who were more successful than those who sold more or put their prices up. It's a question of being subtle. So, I mean, I was on the beach a couple of years ago, I think the south of France, and there was this guy selling these things for these lovely hats, I think they were, for about, I don't know, 10 euros. And of course, you would get them down to like 5 or 4 euros, and they would say, "Oh, no, I can't do that." And I was talking to one of the guys after. He said, "Look, I can't really afford to sort of give away huge discounts." I said, "Well, why don't you sort of, sell 2 for 20? Because the cost of these things is probably 2 or 3 euros. But try and give yourself the opportunity to sell more by being a little bit creative and a bit innovative in how you price things up." This obviously does depend on the business you're in, whether you're in retail or whether you're in business to business. But it's these sorts of little things that can help you. There's a ton of stuff I can teach you, obviously, on my workshops, or I can give you a call. It's rather interesting here. We've had a couple of comments actually about neurons. Yes, it is amazing how complex the brain is, and I think the salespeople who are really clued up on psychology and how their customers' brains can work are actually more successful. Amazingly, we're coming toward the end of my 20-minute slot. Any more questions from anybody? I can see Laurel is busily away in the background there, and Elizabeth. Another question here from a friend of mine, who I haven't seen for some little time actually. And they're saying, how can you remain motivated? Well, this is a huge question. I think remaining motivated is just sort of, I think really you've got to love what you do. Because if you don't love what you do, it's very, very hard to get motivated in your particular field and line of business. Either you've got a real passion for what you're selling, or you don't. And I find the most successful people in business are those who take a real care about what they do, have an interest in what they do, and perhaps more importantly, are always on the lookout to learn more about what they do on a day-to-day basis. I guess it's sort of, continuous professional development, or CPD as it's known in the professions. And I would recommend to anybody, if you're not happy in what you do, try something else. But whatever you do, always bear this in mind. Somewhere along the line, you will be selling. Okay, that's me done. Any questions? I'm sure, Laura, you got many yourself, actually. Otherwise, we can wrap things up. You've asked, how do find cold calling scary? Well, cold calling doesn't need to be scary because a phone is not going to, there's one here, it's not going to bite you. But I think where people get scared about cold calling, Laurel, is that they don't have an objective. A cold call, or the benefit or the purpose of a cold call, is to create or get an appointment. It's not there to sell anything. unless you're in telesales, which is a different sort of thing altogether. So I would advise anybody who finds cold calling scary is to get an objective. Set yourself an objective, and don't set yourself like an hour and a half or a 2 hour chunk of time to do that. And do your research. Find out exactly who you're going to call, why you're going to call them, and how you're going to get that appointment. And you will find that the more research you do into your client's background or their customer or their issues, the more successful you will be. And that way you can structure your session correctly, and you can hopefully be successful. Again, I teach that sometimes on a one-to-one basis, sometimes in our workshops. It's a very, very popular area because really cold calling and cold canvassing is the first part of the sales process. The last part is getting money in after you've done the deal or what you've sold. But unless you start well, cold calling, you're right. You've got to get off on the right foot with anybody. But great question, Laurel. Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else? As we're coming up to like 22 minutes now. Okay. I believe I'm speaking to you again, hopefully at the end of October. But really, if you want to learn more about my my sales workshops, my sales Rainmaker workshops, please give me a call on the number behind, or go to www.thesalesrainmaker.co.uk. And I look forward to hearing from you and seeing some of you on Thursdays at Laurel's networking event. So it's goodbye from me, Jeremy Jacobs. See you on Thursday.